Well, it was pretty gruesome, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, but I wasn't there.
On May 21st, 2026, the state of Tennessee plans to execute a man named Tony Carruthers. He's been on death row for 30 years. There is no physical evidence linking him to the crime. The state's key witness was a paid informant, a fact the state hid for 3 decades. And there is DNA and fingerprint evidence sitting in a lab right now that has never been tested and could prove Tony's innocence. This is his case. To understand what's happening right now, you need to go back to Memphis, Tennessee, March 1994. 3 people go missing. A man named Marcellus Anderson, known to his family as Cello, his mother, Deloise Anderson, and a man named Frederick Tucker. They were all kidnapped from Deloise Anderson's home, and a week later, their bodies were found in a Memphis cemetery underneath someone else's casket. It is a brutal crime, to say the least, and investigators move fast. Police are led to the gravesite by a man named Jonathan Montgomery. He had helped bury the bodies. Jonathan points investigators to his brother, James Montgomery, and to a man named Tony Carruthers. All 3 are arrested. Jonathan Montgomery is later found dead in his jail cell before trial even started, and James Montgomery and Tony Carruthers go to trial together. Tony's trial should never have proceeded the way that it did, and that's not hindsight talking. It was obvious even at the time. Tony Carruthers had been in and out of mental health crises for years, and his attorneys, and there were 6 of them during the course of his trial, all eventually withdrew from the case. The judge, fed up from the constant disruptions to the case, made a decision that would define everything that followed. He forced Tony to represent himself. And let me be clear about what that means. A man with documented severe mental illness, facing 3 counts of first-degree murder and a potential death sentence, stood before a jury alone.
I've tried over and over and over to get lawyers in here for you, and over and over and over, you have succeeded in threatening them, running them away.
No legal training, no ability to effectively cross-examine any of the witnesses, no one in his corner, no representation. His performance at trial was later described by attorneys as, and I'm directly quoting here, inept, ineffective, and disastrous. The jury, of course, convicted him on all counts, and he was sentenced to death 3 times over. But that's actually the smallest factor that accounts for the miscarriage of justice that takes place in this case. Now let's talk about what actually convicted Tony Carruthers, because this is where the case really starts to collapse.
Well, it was pretty gruesome, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, but I wasn't there.
Not only was Tony refused the right to a fair trial because he was forced to represent himself, but there is also no physical evidence linking Tony to this crime. No DNA, no fingerprints, no blood, no physical evidence of any kind. What the case rested on was a web of witness testimonies, specifically the testimony of a jailhouse informant. This jailhouse informant claimed that Tony confessed the crime to him while they were both incarcerated. One man's word, the word of a convicted felon, sitting in jail against Tony Carruthers' life. And here's what makes it worse. For 30 years, the state swore Shaw was not paid or incentivized for his testimony. Time and time again, defense attorneys asked, courts asked, the state said, absolutely not. Then, in August of 2024, the state quietly handed over 20 pages of documents, and those documents showed that Albert Shaw had been a paid, confidential informant the whole time. He received compensation for his testimony. He had reason to lie. But wait, because it gets even worse. There are fingerprints that were recovered from the crime scene, from inside the house where the victims were kidnapped, that do not match Tony Carruthers.
We know that there is no physical evidence that matches Tony. Investigators recovered fingerprints from the home where the victims were kidnapped. None of those fingerprints match Tony. We know there is also DNA that was collected from the crime scene that does not match Tony and remains unidentified.
There is unknown male DNA recovered from a cloth that was found with the bodies that does not match Tony Carruthers. And this is very important, James Montgomery, Tony's co-defendant that was tried with him, gave a statement to investigators that said point blank, Tony had no involvement in this crime, and named the real perpetrator a man named Ronnie Irving. Now, Ronnie Irving has never been investigated, and those fingerprints have never been compared to his. The state of Tennessee is currently 7 days away from executing Tony Carruthers, and they are refusing to test DNA evidence that could prove Tony's innocence.
There is evidence that we know exists that DNA testing can be done on that could prove innocence. We should do that in this case. We should do that in every case. It's the least we can do.
But Tony's attorneys are not giving up. In April 2026, the ACLU filed an emergency lawsuit challenging the state's refusal to conduct forensic testing on that evidence. They filed motions for a stay of execution. They filed for clemency with the governor, Bill Lee. And now 50,000 people have now signed a petition demanding that the state test that evidence. Unfortunately, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals denied that request to test the evidence this week.
It's science. It doesn't take sides. It's not pro-prosecution. It's not pro-defense.
2 jurors from the original trial have signed statements saying they would not have voted to convict Tony had they known what we know now, which is that the state's medical examiner's testimony has since been discredited. The informant was paid for his testimony. The co-defendant says Tony wasn't there, and the forensic evidence points somewhere else entirely. And yet, the state of Tennessee is still moving forwards. Now, Tony Carruthers may have been a difficult defendant. He may have made his situation harder by acting in unexpected and erratic ways. He may be an unlikable character in this story. None of that is in question or up for debate. What is in question is whether or not Tennessee got the right man. And the answer to that question is sitting in a lab, untested, while the clock runs down. If executed on May 21st, Tony Carruthers will be the first man in over a century to be executed after being forced to represent himself. An execution cannot be reversed if we find evidence that he did not, in fact, commit the crime. That, in my opinion, should be enough to halt this execution. Share this video. The ACLU petition is linked in my description. And if you want deeper dives into how America's death penalty system keeps producing cases just like this one, please do subscribe, because sadly, this case is not unique, and there will be many, many more just like it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.